was on a dreary night of November. Welcome, everyone, to Sundays with Frankenstein. When I call out over the frightful catalog of my deeds, I cannot believe that I am he whose thoughts were once filled with sublime and transcendent visions of the beauty and the majesty of goodness. But it is even so, the fallen angel becomes a malignant devil. Yet even that enemy of God and man had friends and associates in his desolation. I am quite alone. Franken readers, this is episode 14 of Sundays with Frankenstein. We'll be covering the last half of the last chapter of the novel, Walton's Final Letters, today. I'm Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach in Philadelphia, and joining me today is first co-host, Dr. Anastasia Klimchinskaya. Hi, Anastasia.
Hi, Ed. Good to be here, as always.
Thank you. And we're both very happy today because joining us is a very special guest, editor extraordinaire of so many great annotated books, including Sherlock Holmes, Lovecraft, Sandman, American Gods, Watchmen, Dracula, and of course, this wonderful new annotated Frankenstein, which everybody that watches the show absolutely loves. Please welcome Leslie Klinger. Hi, Les. Oh, you're still muted, Les.
Hello.
There you go.
So nice to be with you today.
Thank you. We've spruced up the production a little bit here since you were last on Sundays with Dracula. We have a credit sequence, and and we have new music, and I always start with
it's actually professional.
I'm telling you, you do something long enough and you start to look like you know what you're doing. But
well, I love how dramatic it is, the way that you open and you read a bit from the chapters, and the bit you pick is always the most dramatic ones. It's like, okay, Ed, let's start my Sunday with
good
drama.
Thank you. That's my goal. Although as professional as we are, we're not live on Facebook today. So if anybody gets a message anywhere saying, hey, I can't find it on Facebook, that is because they've changed the requirements for what has to happen when I go live. And I could not solve that issue within the 2 minutes that I have when I usually just click and go live on Facebook. So we'll have to just post this video on Facebook later for people to watch. Les, it's early for you out there. You're in California, so I can't imagine you have a cocktail yet, although I don't know, maybe a mimosa.
Still doing my morning coffee.
You're still on coffee, huh? Anastasia, are you able to get anything today, or?
Well, I'm just drinking lemonade, but I do have this wonderful glass since Les is here today and we're both Sherlockians. I actually have my Sherlockian glass today. I don't think you can see, but it was a gift from a fellow Sherlockian named Monica. If you're watching, thank you. And it has my BSI investiture on it. So
nice.
It's engraved with the old Russian woman. So,
your investiture name for the Baker Street Irregulars, and people don't know that. If people don't know that when you're invested in the Baker Street Irregulars, you get a name from the canon, and Anastasia's is the old Russian woman. I like that. Les, what's your irregular investiture?
The Abbey Grange.
The Abbey Grange.
I was very excited. It was back in the year 1999, and it was the first time after many years that a story title had been given out as a investiture again, and so I was very thrilled.
You well deserve it. So I am drinking today, and I wanted to let everybody know what I was drinking. It is a drink called the Creature's Farewell, and it includes this weird but delicious corpse flower Dorian brandy from Tamworth and Art in the Age. And the drink itself is just the brandy with a little sugar and bitters, and put an ice cube in, orange peel, stir it up. It's a odd flavor for this corpse flower brandy, but quite appropriate to Frankenstein. And I really like it. This is only the second time I've done it on the show, and it is absolutely worth the its unusualness to taste this, and it gets kind of better even better as the time goes on. So Christina, our chat Igor today, will put that recipe in the chat, and we'll post it on our video on our website. I want to thank Tamworth Distilling and Art in the Age for this entire season, because this is the last Tamworth drink I'm going to be doing next week on the final after show. I'm going to make my own cocktail, but I want to thank them for all the wonderful spirits and recipes that I've enjoyed at least all season long. You can buy Corpse Flower at Art in the Age in Philadelphia, and as well as all the other wonderful spirits that they sell there. And you can donate to the Rosenbach on their website. When you go to the page for this Corpse Flower, there's a little Rosenbach donate button. So Les, I had you were at the Rosenbach for your annotated Dracula. You were at the Rosenbach for your annotated Frankenstein. Then you came on our Sundays with Dracula for your annotated Dracula.
And I was there for Frankenstein when you had the wonderful display of some manuscript pages.
We did. We had 11 pages, and I'm going to show actually a couple of those a little later today because they're online on the Shelley Godwin archive. But we had borrowed them from the Bodleian where they live, the draft manuscript for Frankenstein. And
I remember I was at that talk. So my annotated edition, Les, I think this is when you signed. Mine is signed, and you wrote "It's alive" for me.
It was a funny. I think I have told Ed the story that when I first started working on Frankenstein, I said to my wife, "Oh, this is very exciting. I'm going to have to go spend some time at the Bodleian Library and, maybe a week or so looking at the manuscript." And then I did a little more research and I said, "Oh, no, they digitized it. So much for that trip."
My perpetual problem, because all of my primary sources in 19th century French literature have been digitized. So I can't get funding to go spend time in Paris.
It's a shame. That's why we write these books. It's all about the research.
Les, how long ago was it? When did you start the Frankenstein annotated? And what led up to that?
2015, maybe. What led up to it was after I did Sherlock Holmes and then Dracula. Everybody said to me, "So I guess you're doing Frankenstein next," and that would have been around 2008 or so when Dracula came out. And I went to Norton and I said, "Well, can I do Frankenstein?" Which is, by the way, I mean, in the nonprofit, that's a Freudian slip. In the nonfiction world of writing, that's how you do it. You basically come up with an idea, you pitch a proposal to a publisher, and then they say, "Yes, here's some money," or they say, "No, thanks." So Norton said, "No, thanks." And they said, interestingly, the book doesn't really sell that well. It's been around for so long, and it's not going to be a hot book. So I put it aside and tried again, basically when it became clear that there was going to be a big sort of international focus on the book in 2018.
Bicentenary in 2018, right. Yeah.
So I tried again, and they were reluctant still, but they said, "Okay, go ahead."
Was the research process, writing process, any different than when you had done Sherlock and Dracula before this, right? They were the
no, I'd already done the first volume of Lovecraft.
Oh, okay.
I had done Sandman and Watchmen, King Lear. But so no, the process was very similar. I mean, I was fortunate. Obviously, there had been, once again, this is the new annotated Frankenstein. There were other annotated Frankensteins out there. And in fact, a beautiful edition from Harvard came out after I'd already turned my manuscript in.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh no. And then I looked at it and said, well, it's different. It was quite different.
That one's clearly designed for scholars. I had that too. So yeah.
Right. Quite different. And there was then also talk about the engineering oriented annotation. But
David
no, the
Gustin,
process was
we had a talk with Dave Gustin, who did the annotated one for the engineers. Yeah.
So the process was really very similar. I mean, I find Frankenstein particularly interesting because of the texts. I love looking at texts, and I sort of discovered that joy when I was first doing the Sherlock Holmes stories and was able to look at many of the manuscripts, not all, but to look at manuscripts for there are something like 15 or 20 that are available to the public, and I looked at many of them. Um, and Dracula was really the first time that I got to really dive into a manuscript and do a detailed comparison. Conan Doyle is actually sort of boring to look at manuscripts because there's so few changes. They're like looking at Mozart compositions. You know, he just sort of they're almost pristine. Dracula, there's a huge number of changes. And so when I got to Frankenstein, it was really a great pleasure to discover that there was so much to talk about from a textual standpoint. Not only the Percy Mary stuff, but 1818 versus the 1825 versus the 1831 and so on.
Yeah, and we'll hit at the very end today, because the last couple paragraphs are different in not only the draft manuscript, but also the fair copy manuscript of the pages of it that exist and the published text. So we can show those and talk about a little bit about that at the very end today. I want to remind anybody in the Zoom chat, make sure you set your chat to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see what you're posting. I see a couple people there have not done that. And if you're wondering why people aren't responding in the chat, that's because they can't see what you're posting. If you have questions for Anastasia or Les or myself, put them in the Q&A, and we will definitely hit those as the show goes along. Les, what do you have coming up next when you're annotated? We announced this when we had the cocktail party, which you were on, which I love.
Yes. So coming out, I'm not sure the date. I guess I'd say mid-year next year will be the new annotated Jekyll and Hyde. To be published by the Mysterious Press. And very much like a Norton volume, I have over 100 illustrations already. There are, hundreds and hundreds of footnotes, detailed comparison of texts, and so on. So I'm very excited about it. And it features an introduction by Joe Hill, which I'm really proud of.
Oh, good. Very nice. That's really great. And people have been getting, Jekyll and Hyde has been a guest. Later today at the mid-break, I will announce what our next Sunday's book will be, our next biblio venture. I'll tell you at the mid-break. And some people are guessing that. I can't say. I don't know what it's going to be. I'm just going to make it up.
You're just going to draw it out of a hat?
Just going to say like, yeah, let's just do this. No, we've planned it out, and we'll announce it at the mid-break. And that'll be a lot of fun today. Anastasia, you have a something to plug too today.
Yeah, so I am on May 16th. I'm giving a talk on science fiction through Profs and Pints, which is this good company, institution that their aim is to democratize learning. So they bring in academics to talk about the research to basically a broad public. They used to be in person, obviously. They went virtual with the pandemic. So there is a ticket price to that. It's $12, but you get access to my 40-minute talk, which will be recorded. And then there's a Q&A as well. And so I'll be talking about a lot of the research that I do on science fiction. So if you guys are, I say, I study the emergence of science fiction in the 19th century, its relationship with science and technology. If you guys are interested in what that actually means and what I actually spent all my time doing, this is going to be hopefully an exciting and interesting overview intended for, a non-academic public. So I believe the chat, Igor put the link in the chat at the very beginning, but I'm going to
it's in there again now. Our lives in a sci-fi world. So you can.
Yep. So I would love to see you all there. Obviously no obligation, but it would be great to have, any of you who are interested in science fiction and kind of its relationship to the rest of our lives.
We'll have another Anastasia Sci-Fi Frankenstein announcement to make next week on our last show when we have an after show wrap-up party, and all the co-hosts will be here. Anastasia will be here, Lauren Nixon and Mary Going, and Dan Hodge will all be joining me, and you guys will get to just talk and tell Ed to shut up for a show, which will be really nice for everybody. And we'll have another thing to plug for you, that show. So yeah, and I'm signed up for your Props and Pines talk, so I can't wait for it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited. I think it's a great kind of venture. I've gone to many of their talks, and I really think it's so great when academics do this kind of thing, where, you know, they kind of leave the classroom or the conference center and talk to the rest of the world. I think that's really important.
It's part of our mission here, and it's part of, you know, how I approach this show is to be able to talk about these works to the general public without it seeming like you need a graduate degree to understand what we're talking about. So and it's one of the great things that I love about your annotated books, Les, is that you write them with the idea in mind that these are readers who are interested in these books and the context around it. And
well, that's a reflection of my own shortcomings. I mean, unlike Anastasia, I don't have a doctorate, you know, so just a JD. So that doesn't qualify me to talk to anybody.
All righty. So what we do here on Frankenstein is we dissect every week. We dissect, anatomize, dismember, and bring back to life this book by Mary Shelley, chapter by chapter, page by page, word by word, as we create our very own conversational annotation of the entire novel. And in doing this, we at the Rosenbach ask you to support us, which you can do by donation. And if you're not already a member, please join. The basic membership level at the Rosenbach is even called the Mary Shelley level. I'll have more to say about that at our mid-break. Again, if you have any questions for us today, drop them in the Q&A. On with the show, because we have a lot to actually hit, even though it's like, you know, it's just it's half a chapter. I've got as many notes as I've had, you know, all year for this book. So let us get going. Unless if you remember, the way we do it is I just go gradually through the chapter from where we're starting.
So where are you starting? Exactly.
We're starting right at Walton in continuation.
August 26th.
Yeah. So, and where we are is last week we finished. Victor has just finished telling his story to Walton, which again wound up being a nested story because Victor told his story and the creature told his story. And then within that, there was even the DeLacy family story with Safey right in the center. And we're back on the ship with Walton and his letters to his sister, Margaret. And this first one is the August 26th, dated August 26th. And I can ask you about years in a sec. Yeah, why don't I ask you about years? Because Mary Shelley writes this as 17, and everybody knows just kind of the way it's set here, or the kind of things that it at least has to be the 1790s. But you've gone through a lot of work to pinpoint dates.
It's what Sherlockians do.
Yeah.
And I always find it fascinating. Again, we've talked about sort of why, what does this have to do with anything? I mean, who cares? My general approach to these wonderful books is to look for the maximum amount of verisimilitude, to show how grounded they are in the real world, and to try and explain and reconcile and all that. It's a Sherlockian game, but it's one that you can do delightfully. Dracula is a whole other subject. I strongly disagree with my friend Elizabeth Miller about the date of Dracula, but Frankenstein has some interesting clues, and the clues are mainly some books that are referenced, where we know quite well the publication dates. So I concluded that this is 1799, and the explanation is sort of strewn throughout my notes in the book. as I pinpointed some other publications. But
1799. We'll go with that. I'm happy to go with the date, or with an exact year. But it's August 26th, and it's Walton in continuation to Mark. You have read this strange and terrific story, Margaret, and do you not feel your blood congeal with horror like that which even now curdles mine? I like the idea that Mary Shelley, it's almost like a little wing for Mary Shelley. Like, I'm telling this story that will, curdle with that will congeal your blood, which is something she always, which she kind of hints at in her preface to the 1831 edition too, that I wanted to write a story that would thrill with horror. I can't remember the exact.
I have it right here. Let me read, because I saw that connection too. So she writes, I busied myself to think of a story, one which would speak to the mysterious fears of our nature and awaken thrilling horror, one to make the reader dread to look around, to curdle the blood and quicken the beatings of the heart. And, that's precisely the language that Walton uses. He also speaks about curdling of the blood. Do you not feel your blood congealed with horror? It's that same idea of a book, a story, having not just an intellectual effect stimulating your mind, but also having a physical, visceral effect, which, again, if you think about kind of the effective theory of the novel, the way that fiction was understood to affect people at the time, the mind is kind of above the body, but she's saying, no, I don't want to just stimulate the mind. I also want to make your body viscerally, physically react to this story.
And Walton, in a sense, is our Watson too. Like the reader Walton stands in for the reader in this. He's just heard the story as we've heard the story. A Sherlockian connection I hadn't thought of until, of course, Les comes on the show. Maybe that's why.
I think it's a little strained. I mean, he's not a participant in the story, unlike
True,
Watson.
yes. Well,
in this,
yeah,
you could liken
rarely.
it to a few of the stories. Yes, there are a couple of stories where Holmes simply tells Watson the story.
But he does stand in for us as well. And especially in moments like this, when he's reacting to the story that he has just heard, just as we heard it and react to it ourselves.
Although I will say that I think in some ways Walton is a stand-in for us, but I think in other ways we're not supposed to relate to him in the sense that, and we'll get to
he's a character who we are supposed to form some judgments about. I think.
Yeah, and that absolutely happens now.
He's not just a neutral narrator or listener.
Yeah.
No, this is part of this. This is sort of the. We've now gotten back to the outer layer of what I call them the Chinese boxes. The onion style of the story within the story within the story within the story. Mm-hmm. We're now back at the outside, sort of slowly emerging, and we're supposed to be looking at that part of the boxes now.
Yeah, and as we'll see later, sort of Walton is absolutely just kind of smitten by Victor. I don't have another word for it.
His fine and lovely eyes. Walton notices right off the bat.
You can read that in many ways, but the point is, I think, as we'll see, Walton kind of failing to get the moral of Victor's story because he is that drawn to Victor, sees that much of a kinship in Victor. And that suggests that maybe he's not quite a reliable narrator. I mean, he adds a level of credibility in that this isn't just, directly Frankenstein's story. We have Walton's corroboration of some of the events, but at the same time, Walton is another filter, and there's a very strong emotional filter.
Those earlier letters, he said, I will love him. Speaking of Victor, I will love him as a brother. He calls him brother of my heart. He also wrote, I desire the company of a man who could sympathize with me, whose eyes would reply to mine. And we're right back into that world. Like that, they were in the earlier letters, the start of the novel, and now we're back there, and Walton is still having this, bromance with Victor. My kids ship them. Well, actually, they shipped them first. They shipped Walton and Victor, and then they were like, no. Victor and Clerval certainly should be the couple in this novel.
It's a ship on a ship.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Walton sees Victor, and he notices this kind of, agitation, a volcano going to burst forth. That this manic behavior that Victor is showing right now, but of course he's dying and he's feverish, and this is at the end of his life, and we'll see that in the way Victor reacts throughout this chapter. This kind of don't do what I do, wait a minute, do what I do, and he goes back and forth with that. But in the second paragraph, there's this really interesting note or moment where the letters of Felix and Safie are there, like they're brought out because the creature, when he told the story, he then gave them to Victor and said, "Look, this will prove to you that I'm telling the truth. Here's these," and we still have these letters that are going on, and that idea that it's proof of the story, right? That there's a kind of authenticity to this, and we'll have that again in another moment when Victor corrects Walton's notes on his story as well. Walton still lost.
Although I'm dubious that those are actually the letters.
Yeah, it would be. It strains credibility that they would have survived not only the creature carrying them for so long, but then Victor also hanging on to them for so long. But comes down to whether
this is a guy at the end of his tether, and he's carrying around these letters. Why?
They don't seem that important. Well,
right.
Yeah, but why would Mary Shelley include that little detail? I think it's a way that, especially from 18th century, early novels, that it's a way of kind of conveying some kind of authority to the text. Like there is a real basis behind this. And Anastasia, in a way, that kind of makes it science fiction in a sense, right? That science fiction requires some kind of real proof underlying the text or the ideas.
Okay. I can go down that rabbit hole.
Go down that rabbit hole.
Oh boy. Okay. So science fiction, if you think about it, a really good way to describe it comes from this critic Darko Subin, who calls it a factual reporting of fiction. So it's things that are, impossible as we currently know. You can't just create life the way Victor did, but it has this kind of what I call a performance of scientific rigor, where the text uses all of this scientific language, all of this kind of it performs all of this documentation, all of this use of scientific language to make it seem like it's real, it's a scientific endeavor, it's a factual scientific account. And so in the early 19th century, there was a lot of scientific hoaxes. You may have heard of the Great Moon hoax and Poe's balloon hoax, that were published in newspapers and taken as real. And a lot of science fiction really comes out of that. You're publishing these kind of fictional stories, but in newspapers with, headlines and dates and pretending that they're real. You have this kind of, all of these paratexts making them seem like they're real. And then in Jules Verne novels, you have all of these like maps and diagrams and all of these other things. So again, all of this kind of performative visual scientific stuff in it. And arguably a lot of that comes out of the late 18th century rise of the novel, where a really big tendency was to say, this isn't a work of fiction, this is some documents I found, some letters I found, a manuscript I found, like this is real, this is not a work of fiction. So Mary Shelley is drawing, I think, on both the rise of the novel in the 18th century and its complicated relationship with fictionality, but also kind of presaging what we would see in the later decades of the 19th century with this kind of performative scientific rigor in these texts telling us about impossible things. So that's my rabbit hole.
Les, you do annotated text on both works that you could say are science fiction, and some that you could say are more fantasy because they don't have this kind of scientific authority behind their ideas. Do you see any, well, I'm just asking you to comment on that or on what Anastasia said.
Oh, I mean, I think that great literature, or let's not use the judgmental adjective. Let's say enduring literature. Enduring literature is literature that manages to do what Anastasia said, which is, to build in a certain level of credibility, and that credibility is that it's rooted firmly in the age. That's what makes it. It's not just some abstract fantasy. It's rooted in the age, and so that depends on these kinds of historical connections and evidentiary tendons, ligaments, whatever you want to call them, to connect the story together and to connect the story to the real world. That is, to the world outside the book. So, it's one of the reasons why this book is so successful, is because with one big gap, namely the creation of the creature, it is believable.
And yeah, and these are, and for me, these are little things that Mary Shelley does to kind of reinforce that idea that this is a believable text, because my characters are telling you that these documents exist. And Victor here at this next juncture says, that he noticed that Walton was taking notes as he was telling his story, and I asked to see them, and then himself corrected and augmented them in many places. And I love this as a bigger idea for this novel too, in that we've talked we several times we've noted similarities between Victor and Percy Shelley, and how, perhaps this is some way, sometimes this is a way for Mary Shelley to work out these things about her husband Percy, and about romantic poets and these kind of creators and irresponsible creators in general, who were and the way they operated. But this text itself, the draft manuscript, is actually Mary Shelley writes it, and then Percy then takes it and corrects it in place and augments and add things, which is exactly what Victor is doing here. So I wonder if there's another little instance of Mary perhaps writing about Percy and not realizing she's writing about Percy.
I have to look at the manuscript to see whether whose edition that is, that hers.
I wonder, is that actually a moment,
or whether it's Percy self-justifying?
He actually adds that,
right, about a mutilated text.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because, and the Charles Robinson here breaks it down into all the things that Percy adds, and no, that's all Mary's handwriting, and he didn't change that little paragraph.
Okay, so
that is a good thing to note, though. Victor also mentions too about the mutilated text, because he wants the corrected story to go down for posterity. That Victor is either responsibly or irresponsibly worried about the way his story will be remembered by Walton and anybody else that might hear it. But when I hear that posterity, I can't help but think of Percy's Ozymandias poem, which was also written in 1817 when Mary was still writing Frankenstein, inspired by this great Ramses II piece of a Ramses II statue that Britain was the British had taken from Egypt. I don't think they even had it set up yet, but it had been in all the papers that they were doing this. And Percy writes a poem about this issue and your name and how it goes down in time, and it's this great statue that, well, it's the vestiges of a statue, the head, the trunkless legs of stone in the desert, and the head has fallen off it, and the poem ends on, because on the pedestal of the statue it says, "My name is Osmandius, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." You know, a poem about the futility of this great Osmandius, you know, setting up, you know, his statues for everyone to look on his works and be in awe of what a great person he was. And Victor's going through some of that himself right now. And
well, you skipped over what I love in this letter, which is the, you know, where Walton apparently asks him, you know, so how did you do this? How did you make the creature? Are you mad? You think I'd tell you? You know, and then why do you want to know? But you know, this is sort of a very nice way to get back at that great hole in the middle of the plot, which is how the heck did this ever?
Yeah. And well, Victor's response is, "Learn my miseries and do not seek to increase your own," which sounds almost like the lesson learned from reading Percy's Osmandius poem, in a sense. So.
Well, and I also want to draw attention to the way that Victor is obsessed with posterity. You know, when he was debating whether to create the female creature or not, he also, I'm reading this as chapter 3 of volume 3. "I shudder to think that future ages might curse me as their pest, whose selfishness had not hesitated to buy its own peace at the price perhaps of the existence of the whole human race." I mean, it's just, he was not worried about the human race. He was worried about what the human race would think of him. And here again, like, he's dying. He's like lying in a bed on his last legs. And he's like, "No, I have to go through your entire narration and correct it on my deathbed just to make sure posterity remembers me properly." Mm-hmm. Like, his priority is here, and, you know, never cease to amaze me.
Is it in this part of the chapter, or was it in the earlier parts where he calls him? Oh no, it's just after this. Walton says, "What a glorious creature must he have been in the days of his prosperity, when he is thus noble and godlike in ruin." Like, he's talking about Victor there.
Yeah, I annotated, and I have godlike, and then I have 2 exclamation marks and question marks.
Yeah, this is, I mean, the scene here doesn't quite have the book. It doesn't quite have the intensity of Gene Wilder's script, you know, where Victor starts life, you know, it doesn't quite have that, but that's what this guy does. It doesn't really make sense to me that he doesn't want to tell us how he did it. This, I mean, it doesn't have to be a demonical enemy. It's this thing that he sought after, which was the secret of life. And what's the big deal? Tell us, you know, we can handle it. Well, especially Walton, who doesn't know beans about science.
Yeah.
And also Victor made extensive notes while making the creature that would just like sat in his laboratory for weeks that Clerval then found, but he doesn't seem to be worried that like Clerval would take off with them and make a creature, or that somebody would find them. Yeah.
Victor is starting now to, and now that Walton mentions this, he's, you know, or he's talking about him, then we get a little bit of reminiscence from Victor. What is this? Is this, oh, did I miss they're reading books together though? Oh yeah.
Yes, that's a little farther on. They're reading books together. But not just reading books, they're sitting around saying, by the way, do you remember that great book, The Blazing World? I love that book. Didn't you love it? And, you know,
our conversations are not always confined.
At which point did Victor read fiction? Because I think we're supposed to understand that Victor spent his time studying science, and it was Elizabeth and Clerval who loved fiction and romances and whatnot. But I guess suddenly Victor is also proficient in the Western canon, in addition to knowing the secret.
He only calls it general literature. So, you know, he may not mean literature. Like now when we think literature, we often think of, you know, fiction, and poetry, but he may actually be referring to even just great scientific works that you know, or historical.
But how would
works.
Walton know? Walton is no scientist. Walton read a lot of travel
Yeah,
books.
he read
That's all he
all
ever
the
read.
travel stuff and all the history stuff. But this is what they're talking about. Again, this is their, the Walton's found his friend. In the earlier letters, I have one want which I have never been able to satisfy, and the absence of the object of which I now feel is a most severe evil. I have no friend. And he wanted someone possessed of a cultivated as well as of a capacious mind whose tastes are like my own, to approve or amend my plans. And that's what, he has found here in Victor, in the adrift in the Arctic Sea. He has found his friend.
It's what he's projected onto
Yes.
Victor. It's
Yes.
clear that it's not reciprocal.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because
Yeah.
Victor will friend zone him in a minute. But before we hit there, Victor gives his greatness of his fall speech. This is this is Victor as Shakespearean tragic hero. I felt as if I were destined for some great enterprise. Talks about the coolness of judgment that fitted me for illustrious achievements. But now, when I reflected on the work I had completed, no less a one than the creation of a sensitive and rational animal, could not rank myself with the herd of common projectors. He sees himself as like the archangel who aspired to omnipotence, and now he is chained in an eternal hell. I conceived the idea and executed the creation of a man. I trod heaven in my thoughts, now exulting in my powers, now burning with the idea of their effects. And then he ends with that high destiny seemed to bear me on until I fell, never, never again to rise. This is a Shakespearean hero speech, right?
Well, and also, I mean, this is the Satan from Paradise Lost speech.
Of course.
Satan in Paradise Lost throughout the entire epic just kind of fails to understand what he did wrong, or refuses to acknowledge it, or just like cannot accept it, which is what Victor is doing as well. When he says I aspired to, he specifically uses the word aspire, which is a very significant word in Paradise Lost. What Satan does, and then what also the narrator does in justifying the ways of God to man, is to aspire to on high, to elevate themselves. I know Victor says, I trod heaven in my thoughts. Just, we can see a parallel there maybe with the way that Satan is trying to gain the throne of heaven, and neither of them kind of realize that the problem is not, destiny or God or any of these things. It is in the nature of their undertaking and kind of the position that they aspire to. So even on his deathbed, Victor is not accepting a single shred of responsibility for what happens, and not even really.
No, it's his destiny.
What he did wrong. It's destiny.
I also like the link here too, because he says what has occurred now serves only to plunge me lower in the dust. And then a line later, it's like the archangel who aspired to omnipotence. He both identifies himself both with Adam and this dust, and Lucifer, the archangel, just as the creature was doing earlier. And for me, it just all reinforces this idea that I've seen going. Les, I've been talking about this for weeks now. This idea that Victor has created the creature and abandoned him, and the creature in response decides to not just affect Victor, but in a sense, almost the creature kind of recreates Victor into a being that is exactly like himself. And that Victor's kind of, in a sense, been recreated and doesn't realize it. But the creature kind of knows this. But Victor doesn't. And even so much that Victor is, for the last couple chapters, was praying to his wandering, to his guiding spirit who is leading him on, without ever coming to the realization it's actually the creature has been your guiding spirit for this whole, part, that Victor is now the the created, the lesser
Yeah.
being, and the creature is in a sense his creator now. We've had this real flip. But also the destiny that this is how Victor sees his life. This is, his, as Anastasia mentioned, he's not taking responsibility for this. I do find it interesting. This is the only time he calls the creature a man. I conceived the idea and executed the creation of a man. And it's these little things that Victor seems to like finally realize towards the end, but it doesn't matter because he still doesn't take responsibility for it. So
he calls him a sensitive and rational animal, and yet he also says that he was born evil. A page later, I think he will say that the creature, was created evil and destructive, and he created this fiend, and he just totally skips over the part where he did create a sensitive and rational being who was not actually evil by nature.
Walton is and then Walton's response to hearing this is like he's an admiral being, I have longed for a friend. I've sought one who could sympathize with and love me. Walton's still just in love with Victor at this point. And then this is the part where Victor totally just friend zones him or unfriend zones him.
Before we get there, I just want to say that the way Walton longs for a friend or a companion is so similar to the way that the creature longs for a mate. I mean, the language again is so similar. I longed for a friend. I sought one who would sympathize with and love me. I mean, that is almost the exact language that the creature is using in begging Victor for a mate.
Yeah.
If
the difference is though that
kind of reading.
The difference is that this is self-inflicted by Walton.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And self-inflicted by Victor feels he suffers as much as the creature, but of course that's also self-inflicted, and he's the creature is the only one at the end of the day who is truly alone and cannot change that condition about himself.
And it's not his fault.
Yeah, and it's not his fault. Yeah. But I love all these little pairings. Now here, there, it's it's always obviously Victor and the creature, but Justine comes in and has is paired with the creature at times, and Elizabeth is paired with the creature, and Clerval and Victor, and then also Clerval is like Walton in a sense. And I love all these connections that Mary Shelley has put throughout this novel for her characters to connect to each other and to the creature. But yeah, at the end of the day, the creature is alone no matter what. But Victor pushes Walton away a little bit here. He calls so miserable a wretch that he is, that Victor calls himself. And then, can any man be to me as Clerval was, or any woman another Elizabeth? That's kind of mean.
So mean. Poor Walton.
I can't think of you that. I don't think of you that way. Like, we've all heard that speech from somebody in our life that we wanted, to continue with. And that, I laugh a joke about it, but it is I think it is a real, there's a very real queer undercurrent in this novel in the full respect of the word, and not just meaning, kind of romantic relationships, but these kind of homosocial relationships that are so extraordinarily important to these characters. And they're always doing things to, it's most evident in the creature, like anybody that gets close to Victor, he's got to kill him because you're mine, baby. And nobody else is going to share your bed or share your life with you. I'm going to take care of them once they try that. So destiny again, though, at the end of this speech, such is not my destiny. I must pursue and destroy the being. Victor's on and on about his destiny. And Les, what do you think about the difference? See, the reason I love the 1818 edition so much is that I feel like in both as opposed to the 1831, which Mary Shelley, re-edited and changed a lot in, although there's not a ton in this last bit here that we're doing today.
Right.
But I feel as if Victor believes it's his destiny, and that's problematic, and I think the reader should notice that, or it's easy for the reader to notice that. But I feel like in the 1831 edition, I almost feel as if Mary Shelley also agrees and has changed and intensified that, where that is what it's going on, that he can't help
Yes. Yes, I think that's very much the case, that the 1831 edition is a much more forgiving view of Victor. And, you know, we can understand why Mary was in that frame of mind when her husband had been dead for 9 years. She could forgive him for being the ass that he was, sleeping with lots of women, etc. And so too, she can be forgiving of Victor for at least feeling like destiny is pushed into these ways.
There was a question here that somebody has, and throwing out there from Maxwell. Do either panelists think Mary Shelley knew of the Nogaret tale? Do you guys know this Nogaret, this French author Nogaret's Frankenstein story, where this is before Mary Shelley's tale? Do you guys don't know this one?
Oh, I think this was posted in the Sundays with Frankenstein Facebook group, right?
Yeah. That Nogaret had written this story about the creation of an automaton creature, and like his name, and his name is Frankenstein in it. It's kind of like a French Frankenstein. It's about 30 years before Frankenstein was created, and it's a curious connection. But I've always just found that it's just a curiosity that I don't know, because we don't know if Mary Shelley ever read that story, and it doesn't seem to connect in any other ways with this novel. But
well, and also, you know, automatons are different from animating what happens here with the animating of a body. I mean, automatons were very kind of, I don't want to say very big in the 18th century, because they were actually, you know, there were not a lot of them. But there were automatons in the 18th century, and there's this really great book by a Penn professor. Her name is Adelaide Voskuil. She wrote this book called Automatons in the Enlightenment, about kind of the cultural significance of the automaton and the way that it could, you know, play music and, you know, sort of imitate all of these gestures and expressions that people would make when they're feeling emotions, and all of these questions around sensibility, you know, again, how do you connect with people based on their outward expressions of emotion if automatons can imitate that? And then in the early 19th century, you have this continuing obsession with automatons in France, because Hoffmann, of course, wrote several stories where you have automatons, and Hoffmann was very popular in France. He was translated, he inspired authors like Dumas. So there's that whole thread there, but I do think that what Mary Shelley is kind of engaging with here is slightly different, partly because she's, you know, using galvanism and the animation of a corpse rather than kind of that mechanical automaton conception, and asking slightly different questions.
I feel like those early automaton stories never really come to grips with that whole kind of AI, that artificial intelligence, and this thing becoming human, as much as modern things do, like Blade Runner does, kind of thing. Or Ex Machina, you know, did a few years ago. That I find them almost different kinds of stories than what Frankenstein is, in which he is a being and a man, and not so much a mechanical being, which I think seems very different for authors in the late 18th, early 19th century.
They were asking different questions, and okay, I apologize for the rabbit hole and the self-advertisement as well. But after I finish my present book on science fiction that I'm working on, my next project will probably be on kind of the cultural history of the machine throughout time. Because one of the things we tend to do is kind of flatten and look at our modern day machine learning and AI and kind of project that onto every form of machine or automaton or android that is in our cultural history. But really, if you look at those texts, they were using the machine or the automaton to ask very different questions. I mean, Descartes, his whole thing with is are humans a machine was about the nature of the soul. In the 18th century, automatons were about sensibility and the expression of emotion. But I think in the present day, again, we kind of flatten and we homogenize. So one of my projects will be to write that kind of cultural history and explain what has the machine or the automaton been made to mean throughout history. And again, here, it's not really a machine or it's not really an automaton, although I think maybe at some point there may be some kind of phrase that talks about the human body as kind of mechanical in some ways, but for the most part, it seems like it's asking different questions.
Sounds like a Pink Floyd album too, so I'm not sure which one, but I do. I think that I entirely agree with you that, that there are different questions, and thank you for far more succinctly describing what I was trying to say about it. I think they're asking different questions. Let's get back to the text. The September 2nd now, next letter. Now he's talking about how they're surrounded by mountains of ice, which admit of no escape and threaten every moment to crush my vessel. That's something for modern readers, if you're not quite aware of, that's absolutely these ships get trapped in ice, and sometimes it's not just the ice melts away, or breaks apart at some point. Sometimes the ice crushes the ships, and this was a problem for sailors trying to reach the North Pole. So they're in serious danger that they could all be killed at any moment. I like that.
But you've skipped over, Ed, that just before this, again, Victor, who is such a contrast from Walton, has been busy telling the crew, get over it, guys. This is insignificant.
Yeah, that's coming
No,
up.
it's just right before here. Even the sailors feel the power of his eloquence. When he speaks, they no longer despair. He has said to them, get over it, guys. These are just ice molecules here. They'll melt.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. Let's keep going.
Yeah, it's also an interesting connection for me because, about 40 years later, Jules Verne will write a novel, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where he'll write about a submarine that also gets trapped in the ice looking for the South Pole, which I think is kind of an interesting connection, the way that in all of these early science fiction texts, you have this desire to go to one of the poles, to the edges of what is known and mapped at the time.
The one thing that I noticed too that Walton writes to his sister is that she shouldn't be concerned with this kind of thing. Just before that, about the sailors, he says that you have a husband and lovely children. You may be happy. Heaven bless you and make you so. And also that theme that's run through here, that especially get emphasized with Victor and his family early on in his life, and with the creature, that what's more important than these glorious endeavors is actually just having a happy family at home and being happy with each other. And Walton should realize that. He writes it to his sister, but he still has to go off on his voyage. And then we get to Victor, endeavors to fill me with hope. Really, just stop, Victor. And then the sailors are starting to be moved by him, and they excite him, or he excites them. Why don't we take a break here? I'll do my little mid-break spiel.
Can I say one more quick thing before we do the break?
Go for it.
Well, I just want to say, so we've seen the parallel between Walton and Victor in terms of they're both pushing at the edges of the known. And, for glory and ambition or whatnot, trying to do this great thing, discover the pole or create life. And at this moment, Walton, his sailors say, if we keep going, we're going to die. And they ask him to go back. So at this moment, Walton has the choice. Does he continue to be like Victor and do the same things Victor did in the sense of continuing in the down the road he set out on of going to the pole and of this great ambition, even though it might end in death? Or does he turn back before he does that? So I think we can almost go to our mid-break on this cliffhanger of, does Walton learn anything from Victor's story that he's just heard? Or is he so blinded by the kinship that he sees between himself and Victor that he cannot comprehend the moral of the story? And therefore he decides to follow in Victor's footsteps without realizing the kinds of repercussions that his actions may have. So that is my cliffhanger. And now the break.
We will see how that resolves. For our mid-break, we bring you Sundays with Frankenstein. I almost said Dracula. That hasn't happened in a long time. We bring Sundays with Frankenstein to you for free, as we did with Sundays with Dracula last year. So if you'd like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so. There's a little glass for the Sundays with Frankenstein. I have
but this is my actually blood spattered.
Oh, your Dracula glass. Yeah.
Yes. Since you always said Dracula.
If anyone would like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so at our website, but you could also become a member. Members of the Rosenbach get free and exclusive access to some programs, 10% off of any of our reading courses, 50% off of any Rosenbach programs, one which is happening tomorrow night that I'll tell you about. And the basic membership level of the Rosenbach is called the Mary Shelley level. So what could be more perfect for Franken readers to join the Rosenbach at the Mary Shelley level and help us bring the books and manuscripts in our collections to life? There's a program tomorrow night, a Shakespeare program called Of Human Kindness, Keeping the Humanities Alive Through Shakespeare. It is a talk given by Paula Marantz Cohen, who is the Dean of the Pannoni Honors College at Drexel University. And she's the author of a new book, which I have right here, called Of Human Kindness, What Shakespeare Teaches Us About Empathy. And Dr. Dean Cohen's talk tomorrow night will be on how reading Shakespeare can help revive humanities, values, and ideas at a time when universities have turned to STEM and careerism in higher education. While exploring Shakespeare's plays with her students, Cohen discovered that teaching and discussing his plays unlocked a surprising sense of compassion in the classroom. Shakespeare's genius lay with his ability to arouse empathy, even when his characters exist in alien contexts and behave in reprehensible ways. So I'm very, very interested in this talk tomorrow night that will happen. But you guys all want to know what book we are doing next. For our next Sundays with series, it's not going to begin for a couple months again. Remember, we took a 2-month pause in between Dracula and Frankenstein. We'll do that again for the next one. The next series will begin on July 11th. And there have been so many guesses. Everybody's named every book in the Rosenbach collection, it seems, and even books that are not in the Rosenbach collection, which I can't do. But the next book will be Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I'm very excited to do this one. It's another favorite book of mine. It's also very gothic. You could say there's kind of a monster in this book and then talk about who you really think the monster is, because it could be, it's not necessarily one character. In a sense, like Frankenstein, like who's the monster, and Frankenstein is the creature of Victor. That kind of something like that goes on in Jane Eyre as well. It's a long book. It is, much longer than we've done, even longer than Dracula. Dracula, we wound up going 28 weeks for 27 chapters. For Jane Eyre. It's 38 chapters, and we're going to do it in 30 weeks. So it's going to be a long, careful annotation of the entire novel week by week from July 11th to January 30th. I'm trying to see if we have the link ready to go yet. If you go to the Rosenbach website, there is a page to register for it there. Here it is. The link is in the chat here now. And if you just go to the Rosenbach and hit on programs, and it's Sundays with Jane Eyre, and you can register for it right away. Our connection with Jane Eyre isn't just because I love this book and I want to do it. We have a first edition of Jane Eyre in our collection. We also have Lewis Carroll's own copy of Jane Eyre, along with another Villette, another Charlotte Bronte book. We have a letter from Charlotte Bronte to her friend Ellen Nussey, which is really nice to have. But most significantly, we have the manuscript in Charlotte's own hand of the preface she wrote for the second edition of Jane Eyre, and she even signs that Currer Bell. So she's still not using her real name for the second edition, and she signs it Currer Bell. Over the weeks that we do it, we'll share these items from our collections, have spirited conversations about the book, and I'll have a lot of experts and creators of things about Jane Eyre and the Bronte family on. I'm talking to the Bronte parsonage in Haworth in England about having them collaborate with us for some of these. The Morgan Library, who also has some great Bronte things in their collections. The co-hosting will be a little different. I won't rotate just three sets of co-hosts throughout. We'll probably wind up having occasionally co-hosts will come back, but I'll do as many different people on every week as possible. So it'll be a wide variety of co-hosts all throughout. So Anastasia, Jane Eyre, what do you think of Jane Eyre?
Well, I will say that of the Brontes, my preference has always been for Wuthering Heights.
Is Wuthering Heights?
Yeah, but I think Jane Eyre is so significant in terms of, for one thing, establishing so many of our Gothic, well, not establishing, but solidifying so many of our Gothic conventions. The idea of the madwoman in the attic, which then spawned this really great, very thick book called The Madwoman in the Attic. It's a book of very famous feminist scholarship on 19th century novels by women. It produced this great sequel, which I don't know if I have it. I thought it was, it's right there. A rather prequel called Wide Sargasso Sea, which is sort of from the perspective of sad madwoman in the attic, and kind of deconstructs some of the colonial and race-related assumptions that are hidden in the novel. There's so much there to unpack. So I think you guys will have a great time, and I'm really looking forward to finding out who you're going to invite onto the show to talk about it.
And I will talk more about that next week on our after show as well. 27
I think
people.
the cocktails are going to be a challenge.
It will be, and it won't be a cocktail a week as the last two have been. It'll be other things as well, I think. And I think some weeks we'll even just have tea and do that.
Oh, good. Maybe tea they can actually ship to me.
Yes, so that could very well happen. Yeah, there'll be a different kind of drinking schedule, I think, with Jane Eyre than has gone on with the two monster books. 27 people just registered for it, which is great. And I want to say, Tammy Dots, who's watching, you are number one. So there you go. So somebody had to be first, and it was Tammy. And that's really nice because she watches the show, all the time.
I will say about the drinks, boozy tea is a thing. Actually, there's this hotel in Chicago that before the pandemic used to do this British afternoon tea, but it was boozy tea. So they put booze in your tea. It also gave you the little sandwiches and everything. So you can do that, Ed.
I will do all of that. I cannot wait. I'll more so with Jane Eyre than obviously, even though these other two works were also, British, authors, I'll really be able to get, Brit love on for Jane Eyre, I think, more than I have for these last two. So that'll be a lot of fun. So it's Jane Eyre, everyone. That'll start on July 11th. You can register now. We'll be releasing more information about it as we go on. There'll also be a Sundays with Jane Eyre Facebook group that you can join, and we can talk about it in the lead up to it beginning, and then while it's going strong, just like the Sundays with Frankenstein and Sundays with Dracula Facebook groups run as well. So Jane Eyre is the book. I hope everybody likes it. I love it. I think it'll be a lot of fun, and it should be. So we'll approach it with the same level of we're learning things and really taking deep dives into these books, but we're gonna have fun doing this every week for a half a year, which will be really nice. So for me, so less, but there's no annotated Jane Eyre.
Yeah, everybody's asking what annotated edition should
there is none.
Because
It's
there's
too
no
big.
Les Klinger edition.
Les needs to get
Oxford
on that.
World's Classics.
Right.
But
And I have
Les,
to say,
you
I
need to get
haven't
on
the
that.
slightest temptation to annotate Jane Eyre. It has never made my top 30 list. So,
It's a good one, though. Let me tell you, it's really great. I really love it, and very gothic. So there's a lot of fun gothic elements to it as well, which I'm really looking forward to talking about. So people that did want Jekyll and Hyde, and I know that you're not, and I would love to do that, but we don't have any. We don't have Jekyll and Hyde in our collection.
I'm an English major. I read Jane Eyre.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful book. It's just not something that piques my interest. I mean, kind of like
I had no idea you were
know,
an English major.
I was. I
Fascinating.
failed the English majorhood though when I decided to go to law school. But it was. My choices of things to annotate is a little different. I mean, I'm not a scholar, as I've said repeatedly, and like you, Ed, it has to be a book that I want to spend a lot of time with.
Oh yeah. I'll be spending a lot of time with Jane Eyre, starting as soon as Frankenstein ends next week. I'll be reading Jane Eyre, reading books about Jane Eyre, and doing all my own research as well. And that's a commitment. You have to commit to a book that you really love and want to spend time with.
Yes, I see that there is an annotated edition, by the way. It's an ebook.
Yeah, there's a couple, and I think it just means there's notes in it, and it's
it's often very surprising what these advertisements mean.
Yeah,
I was looking the other day for an annotated edition or an illustrated edition of something or other. And I ordered the book foolishly, and it came, and it was illustrated. It had one illustration.
One illustration.
Oh,
yeah.
man.
Well, there you go. They didn't lie.
They didn't lie. I did return it, however.
Good. All right. Let us get back to this chapter so we can finish in some reasonable amount of time today. And I'm finishing this chapter, whether or not, but either of you are like at some point, like, Ed, I'm out. I gotta go. I'm fine. I'm finishing this chapter. September 5, we are now. He notes, Walt notes that many of my unfortunate comrades have already found a grave amidst this scene of desolation. Another connection with Victor here, that Walton's in an endeavor not just for glory and we're trapped in the ice and we hope to get back, but people are dying and have died because of this quest to make great discoveries, but also, as Walton has said, for glory as well. And so a reminder that this is something that is not that far different than, at least in the body count, maybe, as to what Victor has done, or what Victor has kind of set in motion with his own, mission here. But he is declining in health. A feverish fire still glimmers in his eyes, though. That glimmering eye he has, which again, I just keep reading glittering eye from Rime of the Ancient Mariner every time he says glimmering. But Victor is failing. And now the crew finally threatens mutiny. Or they have in the last letter he mentioned it. And they're or he had fears of it, and they want him to, if the vessel, if the ice breaks up and they're okay, they want him to go south, go back home. Walton's not learned the lesson yet. He says, I had not despaired, nor had I yet conceived the idea of returning if set free. Could I, in justice or even impossibility, refuse this demand? So he at least realizes that much about it, that it is a case of justice or injustice if he forces his crew to continue on this dangerous mission. And now Victor walks in, or comes in and gives his little speech to the crew, which is this great rousing speech that I'd be like, if I heard it, I'd be like, all right, I'm going on. This is Victor's,
his Nude Rockney moment.
Yeah, obviously this is his St. Crispin's Day speech, to rally the troops before the final battle, before the battle. And just the way he addressed, what do you mean? What do you demand of your captain? Are you then so easily turned from your design? Did you not call this a glorious expedition? He says, you were hereafter to be hailed as the benefactors of your species, your names adored as belonging to brave men who encountered death for honor and the benefit of mankind. We've had that, talk before from, from the benefactors of your species. The victors in the novel, Victor's a new species would bless me as its creator and source. But even Walton, in an earlier letter in the beginning of the novel, talked about the inestimable benefit which I shall confer on all mankind to the last generation.
I've been doing some research into Arctic exploration at the time and trying to figure out what this inestimable benefit is. So Walton says he's looking for two things. One is the North Pole, where the needle points, which he says would fix a lot of astronomical calculations, so it would be useful to astronomers. And then
scientific benefit.
Yeah, and then he's looking for what he says or for the Northwest Passage, although I've been looking into this, and apparently by this point in time, they had realized that the Northwest Passage would actually not be that helpful to find because it's just too dangerous, and they're already going south around the Good Hope as ships almost did a few weeks ago when we had that, Suez Canal fun times. But I mean, it's interesting to me because neither what Victor does nor what Walton does seems to me to be all that useful or beneficial in kind of the grand scheme of things. Victor himself points out that he can create life, but he doesn't know how to prevent people from dying, or all of the people that were killed, Clerval, Elizabeth. He can't bring them back for whatever reason. It would not be them. So as much as they talk about the beneficial outcomes of all of their, danger and ambition and pursuits, it's hard to tell what those actually are.
Well, they're also,
they were still caught up in this strange notion that there was going to be some wonderful land up there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Walton mentions that too, that the climb might be, beautiful up there, and it's
that's right,
because it's that.
But he's been reading Margaret Cavendish, clearly.
Well, yeah, but we don't really see that the crew hasn't really bought into this. For Victor to tell them now, oh, you guys are going back on, you're giving up what was your purpose. Wasn't ever their purpose.
They're sailors. This is just my job.
Exactly.
They don't even get hazard pay, clearly.
Well, they would get the glory, though. Especially as Victor ends his little speech here.
Yeah, does my landlord accept glory as a payment for the rent?
Oh, be men, or be more than men. Be steady to your purposes and firm as a rock. This ice is not made of such stuff as your hearts may be. It is mutable, cannot withstand you if you say that it shall not. Do not return to your families with the stigma of disgrace marked on your brows. Return as heroes who have fought and conquered and who know not what it is to turn their backs on the foe.
The men looked at one another and were unable to reply. We know they were looking at each other going, this guy is a lunatic.
Yeah. That Victor thinks he's inspiring them to do something great, but they're sailors. He's also behaving very much like this is kind of like Ulysses but Ulysses in Dante's Inferno. Dante had never read the Odyssey or the Iliad, but he knows Ulysses through other stories told about him, and Dante creates a story about Ulysses that he doesn't even find. In that, after everything is over, Ulysses goes to his men and one more time says, we need to go out on a voyage to discover the unknown, and convinces them to do that. And that mission, that quest purely for glory is a sin. It ends you up in the eighth circle of hell, according to Dante, and which is the point he's making. Tennyson winds up writing his great Ulysses, poem, on using that same moment, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. A poem that is equally inspiring and seems equally ironic, that you would ask people to do something that has no benefit to anybody except for just the glory of doing it. And I really see Mary, especially as we know that she's reading Dante at the time and has come across this story, as to see Victor giving this kind of speech reads very much like the Ulysses speech in Dante's Inferno, which she is reading just then. So I wanted to mention that link. The cruise, they're not going to do it. September 7th, the die is cast. Another little classical reference there from Walton. Mary's also reading Suetonius while she's writing this, and that is the quote. That is the translation of the quote from Caesar. The die is cast after he, what is it? Crosses the Rubicon. Is that it? And then it's going to take Rome. But it's the die is, but for Walton, the die is cast, meaning we have to return. Like it's not on to victory. It is, we have to go back. The crew says no, and Walton has had his hopes blasted by cowardice and indecision. He's as bad as Victor. He can't seem to make up his mind as to, like, is this a good thing to put you all in danger? Or are you all being cowards if you won't follow me into danger?
Yes, so we have the resolution of that cliffhanger here that I mentioned right before the break. But the interesting thing is that, Walton does not make this decision because he has heard Victor's story and drawn some moral from it about, the stupidity of grand scientific enterprise that gets people killed. He's turning back because his sailors have essentially pressured him into returning, and he is afraid of mutiny, but he has not actually learned the moral of the story that he's just heard.
Mm-hmm. He has not, but he has one more letter to see if he'll learn that lesson. I don't think he will. And this is the final letter of the novel, September 12th. It is past. I am returning to England. I have lost my hopes of utility and glory. And also, I have lost my friend. So Victor has died, and now he's going to tell what happens after that. Although it's like 3 times he's mentioned returning to England. And he's not returning to England. He should be returning to Archangel, where they came out of, in Russia. And I think in one of the drafts, England is crossed out and Archangel is written, but then it doesn't get printed. England still gets printed. I can't remember exactly now, but Um, she also has this date here. Some people, if you're reading an 1818 edition, it might say in this letter, which is dated September 12th, it might say September 19th, the ice began to move. That's actually a typo in the draft. Actually, the dates were completely different at one point, and she had to change them. But then she did write September 9th, but then it was misprinted as the 19th, and it's corrected in the 1831 edition. But it's September 9th, the ice began to move. But as we could only remain passive, Walton mentions about the ship. And I like that idea that they are absolutely at the mercy of nature. The great nature that people pray to all throughout this novel, the nature that Victor is challenging by, creating another human. Nobody has power over nature. They think that you do, but you don't. You think you can conquer it and move on, but you can't, that you have to remain passive. Walton cannot leave them unwilling to danger, must return. And then Victor is obviously upset about this, but he's literally on his last, breath here. Surely the spirits who assist my vengeance will endow me with sufficient strength, for himself to go on. Like, what are they going to put him back out on a sled on some ice floe? Walton mentions his friend has not many hours to live. And then Victor gives his big final speech. We ready for this final speech? We do have a mention. Earlier on, Hamed had commented here that considering how many characters in the novel question Victor's sanity, I think Walton also serves as a device to communicate to the reader that Victor isn't just insane or delusional, but that the creature exists, especially when you consider this final scene that's coming up. I mean, Walton's the only proof that the creature exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like nobody else does. Well, I mean, other people say it, but the creature has told the story that they have seen me. Walton's the only other character in the story who tells a story himself, his own first person, that he sees.
I mean, most of the people who have seen the creature are dead due to the creature. So,
yeah. And Bob Pierce wanted me to mention the name of the Automaton book author. The French author is Francois Felix Nogaret. It's Nogaret. You can look that up online. Victor is, for his final words, he wants to talk about the burning hatred and the ardent desire of revenge. That's what he wants to talk about in his final, moments here. I feel myself justified in desiring the death of my adversary. I find it, he says, I have been occupied in examining my past conduct, nor do I find it blamable.
Yeah, Victor, you did absolutely nothing wrong, honey.
It's a little surprising at this point that Victor doesn't learn more from this, that he's kind of still sticking to this. It's not my fault how it turned out. All this bad stuff happened, which really affected me, because it's more about how it affects him than the murder of the people he loves. It's not so much about their murder as how it's affected him and made him sad about it. But that's a shocking line, I think, for readers to come across. Nor do I find it blamable. I can't imagine a reader, especially by this point, not recognizing that Victor is at fault here. And now we learn that he can't even come to grips with it himself, right, Les?
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a very interesting question of sort of what would I can't go back to a fresh reading. I can't put myself with that sort of eraser and remember what it was like the first time reading this book. I'm not sure that the reader comes out of this saying Victor's a bad person. I think, we go with the flow here. I mean, we're being told Victor is a great guy and all that. I think it's only on reflection. I
Interesting.
don't think it's, I don't think there's a sort of growing sense that Victor is a bad person, because I think we're so caught up in the action of the book
Mhm.
that we don't reflect that until we get to the end and finally get some rest and can look back and say, wow.
My question is always one of the impossible questions to answer is how do original readers, how do 1818 readers see this? And we've wrestled with this a bit on the show. Well, I've wrestled with it. I think most of our audience is like, Victor's horrible and let's just leave it at that. But I always wrestle with this idea that Mary Shelley's trying to create this kind of, romantic, Byronic hero here, but also criticize that person, that kind of aspirer, and I wonder how her original readers are approaching that. I know we read this book much differently now than people would have originally read it, so our responses are going to be a little different, but that idea of how that response changes over time, I find very interesting. But Victor,
Yeah, right. And I'm not sure that the negativity that we feel today about Victor is very different than it was then. I mean, today we can look at this and we look at it in the context of Mary's life, her relationship with Percy, her relationship with her father, etc., and read the book as expressing that in a way that a contemporary reader certainly couldn't have.
mm-hmm.
And in addition, I mean, the only real indicator of sort of contemporary takes, I think, not just in addition to reviews, is the theatrical performances.
Yeah.
Which focused not on what a bad person Victor was. They focused on what a presumptuous person he was. Remember, the play is called Presumption.
Yeah.
So this is about, don't play God. Yeah. That's what this book, I think, came across as being the message, if you will. Not, hey, you explorers shouldn't do your exploring. You should stay home and take care of the wife and kids. Yeah. I think that's a much more modern reading, and I don't think it was the reading that 19th century readers gave.
It doesn't seem to be. Jody just posted here that when on her first reading, in her first reading, she hated the creature as whiny, and now rereading it older, she dislikes Victor. Like they flipped for her. Like she actually did not maybe sympathize with the creature on her first reading of it, whenever that was, and has changed there now.
Isn't that part of our own human experience? It's like when you hear whiny kids complaining about how their parents treated them, until we eventually get to the point of saying, oh, maybe my parents weren't the best parents. By the way, before we get too far afield from the science discussion, I wanted to mention this book that a friend just gave me. Hubert Wilkins, nobody's heard of, unless you're really a student of Arctic exploration. And the book opens with the scene of him trying to convince his crew and make the decision about whether a submarine should go under the North Pole at this point. I'm sorry, the Arctic, yeah. Dive into the Arctic Ocean. And the crew is not quite rebelling, but it's very similar to the scene.
The Last Explorer, is that what that's
The Last Explorer, about Hubert Wilkins.
Interesting. Victor is not blameable because he says, in a fit of enthusiastic madness, I created a rational creature and was bound towards him to assure, as far as was in my power, his happiness and well-being. So he's kind of wants it both ways here as he's trying to reason it out. Like, I'm bound to, he says, this was my duty to help this creature, but it was in a fit of enthusiastic madness that he created him, which I think is really pushing the, responsibility off of himself. And then he says that my duties towards my fellow creatures, not the creature I created, but my fellow creatures, which is changed in the 1831. Right? I have that.
Yeah, to the beings of my own species. Thanks.
Beings of my
for
own
annotating that.
species. Instead of my fellow creatures. I think that's interesting that Mary Shelley herself even perhaps noticed that, you know, maybe he needs to help him justify, needs to rephrase that better. That his beings of his own species, his fellow creature, had greater claims to his attention.
Well, and what he's doing here is he's constructing this as an either or, you know, either I have a duty to my creature or to my creation, but I also have a duty to my fellow human beings, and I have to pick one. I can't do both. But the thing is, it only becomes an either or once the creature has been rejected by the de Lacys and starts asking for a mate. But at the moment of creation, the creature is good and he has no intention of you know, killing or destroying anybody. So at that moment of creation, it does not have to be an either or. He can fulfill his duty to the creature by accepting him and nourishing him and parenting him. But because Victor has rejected the creature has gone through all of this rejection. He has then become, you know, evil and murderous. And then it becomes that either or. But Victor completely skips over that to justify what happened.
Mm-hmm. He yeah, well, yes, and let's move. He also says, urged by this view, I refuse to create a companion, because, you know, bad things would happen because of that. And then he gets into this part towards the end here where he says, I asked Walton, he says, I asked you to undertake my unfinished work, which would be the revenge part. And then yet I cannot ask you to renounce your country and friends to fulfill this task. I dare not ask you to do what I think right, for I may still be misled by passion. He keeps asking him by saying, I'm not going to ask you to do it. Like 3 times he says, I won't ask you to do this. I'm not going to ask you to do that. You know, like, so clearly he wants Walton to fulfill this task if he cannot do it. And then we get the finale here. The forms of the beloved dead flit before me, and I hasten to their arms. Farewell, Walton. Seek happiness and tranquility and avoid ambition, even if it be only the apparently innocent one of distinguishing yourself in science and discoveries. Yet why do I say this? I have myself been blasted in these hopes, yet another may succeed. And he dies with a smile on his lips, actually, because the smile passed away from his lips after he dies. He still can't come to grips with the fact that, you know, someone else shouldn't go on and do the kinds of things that he has done. Seek happiness and tranquility and avoid ambition. And, you know, then at the end, yet another may succeed. That he wants Walton to go on. So.
Well, but also and avoid ambition, even if it be only the apparently innocent one of distinguishing yourself in science and discoveries. I mean, again, as we have discovered, distinguishing yourself in science and discoveries is not innocent. And it is very hard to make it innocent because science and technology are part of human life and integrated into human society and have consequences. Like if you discover new things and you invent new things, like that has consequences in the world, especially at this moment in time when so much of technology is becoming so much more widespread because of industrialization. It's affecting a greater, you know, a much greater amount of people as it's spreading through the world. So it's not innocent. It's something integrated into our lives and with consequences for our lives.
Somebody wrote in the chat, avoid ambition. Yes, especially scientists. Um,
That's
so,
why they made that edition of Frankenstein for the scientists and the
Yeah.
creators. You know, they wanted to make sure they learned something, unlike Victor.
but I also think like the apparently innocent one of distinguishing yourself, and like Victor, what you were talking about earlier on with about when creating there's nothing innocent about what you were trying to do. But he was trying to create a new species, as he mentioned more than once, and then backed away from it when it didn't go as planned. Victor's dead. Anything, Les? Victor's dead. Anything about Victor before we move on from him to finally seeing the creature again?
Yeah, I think it's evident here that it's not been about creating a new species. It's been about self-aggrandizement.
Yeah.
It's never been about the goal. It's been about the byproduct of that goal, which is I'll be famous, I'll be regarded as a hero, and all that. And that's what's misguided, not the goal itself.
Yeah. And it's disheartening that that's all Walton can see too. Right away, he's like the extinction of this glorious spirit. Like he still sees the glory in it. He just died on your ship, like wasted away after, this horrible ordeal that he has gone through, and you're still looking at it as glorious. So I worry for Walton right now.
Well, we're about to see that Walton turns out to be just one of the weakest people around. I mean, he can't make up his mind about who he is or what he's going to do. The crew makes the decision for him there, and now he completely breaks his promise that he's just made to Victor.
He will do something, and he will say something to the creature, though, that I think is very significant. So, which is a moment in the text that I think is like, wow, that's, you've learned something here. But we'll get to that in a second, because
I would also like to say that the entire chat is cheering now that Victor's finally dead. They're all like, yes.
Yeah, they've not been happy Victor fans.
We have
ding dong, Victor's dead.
On Victor for this entire show.
We get a quick movement into present tense here, which I always like in the text, that kind of that immediacy of this is going on right now. He writes, I am interrupted. What do these sounds pretend? It is midnight. And good night, my sister. And he has to go and figure out what's going on. And it's the creature has come in. I entered the cabinet where lay the remains of my ill-fated and admirable friend. Over him hung a form which I cannot find words to describe, gigantic in stature, yet uncouth and distorted in its proportions. As he hung over the coffin, his face was concealed by long locks of ragged hair, but one vast hand was extended, in color and apparent texture like that of a mummy. Never did I behold a vision so horrible as his face, of such loathsome yet appalling hideousness. And I endeavored to recollect what were my duties with regard to this destroyer. I called on him to stay. First is his own impression is much like what Victor has told him, and Walton has the same reaction, that this, his, death-like appearance and the hand like a mummy's. But I like this scene also because it's almost like, because in describing him that way, it's like death coming, like death is coming to take its own away. He's like the Grim Reaper here. But also that hand reaching out, Walton says, that's what happens when the creature's born and Victor's in bed and the creature comes in and one hand was stretched out seemingly to detain me, but I escaped and rushed down the stairs. And it's like, we've come full circle here. The creature's, it almost seems like when he sees the creature living, maybe the creature is giving some kind of, maybe it almost looks like maybe he's giving some kind of benediction over the corpse, but it's more he's not reaching, or maybe he's reaching to detain Victor from death. But I think as continued to happen here, he just wants the connection. He wants to touch his creator and wants that companionship. and we get this final shot of him trying to do that, but of course it's too late. It's that last line though, that paragraph though, that this is the line that I was referring to, that this is such an important thing for Walton to do. He says, I called on him to stay. And that's not what Victor did. Victor fled when he saw the creature, and Walton calls on him to stay, which is exactly what DeLacy did. Blind DeLacy says, no, stay, don't go away, I can help you. And Walton, although we'll go through this, back and forth with him and the creature, he at least gives him the opportunity. Something that Victor never did, and most people don't do when they see the creature. Now, of course, Walton knows his whole story, so he's been braced for this. So it's understandable that he would do this. But
well, and he says, I dared not raise my looks upon his face. So Walton is looking away, almost like he realizes, if I look at the creature, I will not be able to see him as a person, as human, to hear what he has to say. But if I look away, if I keep myself blind, like the old DeLacy, I will hear his words, and then be able to connect with him beyond his appearance.
Yeah,
that last for all of 5 seconds.
Yeah, but more than looking away, I shut my eyes involuntarily. He's in a sense blind. Like I've seen it, and then he closes his eyes, and then he asks him to stay, and so he's very much like DeLacy in this moment, in asking him to stay. By
the way, I mean, it doesn't say that the creature extended his hand toward the corpse. We don't know whether he was extending his hand like this when
one
he
hand,
saw.
Yeah.
It doesn't. We don't know what he was doing.
True. But he is hung over the coffin.
He is looking down at the coffin. Maybe he's got a like that wonderful scene from the movie Charade. Maybe he's got a pin in his hand. He's sticking it into Victor to make sure he's really dead.
Making sure. Well, he will address that, but it's what he's actually doing. The creature pauses though. He asks him to stay, and he says he paused, looking on me with.
But wait, before we get to the pause, what is Walton's problem here? He says he closes his eyes and endeavored to recollect what were my duties.
Yeah. So his first reaction is, wait a minute, I have to destroy this creature. The guy, it is my duty to fulfill Victor's last wishes, is what he's really thinking. And then calls on him to stay. So it's, is he asking him to stay so I can do this? Or asking him to stay to give him a chance to explain himself.
Right. Don't go. I have to kill you.
Yeah. And then he'll completely challenge the creature now too, into what the creature's, doing here, and how the creature is responding to Victor's death. Because we get this lament from the creature first. That is also my victim. In his murder, my crimes are consummated. The miserable series of my being is wound to its close. Oh, Frankenstein, generous and self-devoted being. And that self-devoted is meaning devoted to, you devote yourself to helping others. That's just a word that they used then. It didn't mean devoted only to himself. It means generous. Generous and self-devoted being. What does it avail that I now ask thee to pardon me? I who irretrievably destroyed thee by destroying all thou lovest. Alas, he is cold. He cannot answer me. The creature's asking forgiveness, something Victor never does, of the creature. For anything that's happened to the creature. But the creature's first response is to ask forgiveness of his creator, whom he has destroyed. It's, the creature's good. What's your reaction to the creature? His first reaction is to forgive Victor, who has caused him all this, and the creature will later acknowledge the own things that he has done wrong. What do you guys think of his lament to start?
It's this weird thing where destroying Victor has been the only thing that has given the creature's life meaning for the past, however many years at this point. And now that Victor is gone, the creature does not have a purpose. And so it's almost this kind of strange regret because Victor is gone and he has destroyed the thing that has given his life meaning. And, I think it's the way that you project good things onto somebody once they're gone as a way of, as a form of regret, as a form of grief. And even though, in life you would not have ascribed those qualities to them, I think that's what's happening here.
And remember, the creature really hasn't done anything to Victor for quite a while. I mean, he's been on the run.
Yeah.
That's all. He didn't make Victor chase him.
Well, he does in a sense. I mean, he keeps leading him on. He keeps leaving messages that say, "You can't catch me," in a sense,
Right.
Catch
But
me if
what's
you can.
he supposed to do?
Yeah. And he has, but as he will talk about, as he's murdered people here, and as he says in this little speech here, that like I murdered these people, and or what does he say, that I destroyed you by destroying all the people you
Right. I
love.
destroyed all the people
Yeah.
that you cared about.
So, and which is why he is, come after him. What now happens here is it's the I think it's the editors of that Harvard Frankenstein, Susan Wolfson and Robert LeVeo call like they like this is the kind of final courtroom scene that happens in this novel, because courtroom scenes are important in this novel. We've had 3 of them before, and now this is a kind of courtroom scene in a sense where the creature has to come and plead his case to Walton, as the kind of, acting as a kind of magistrate at the end here. The creature says, oh, well, Walton goes back to the duty of obeying the dying request of my friend and destroying his enemy, is now suspended by a mixture of curiosity and compassion. Now, here's where Walton is starting to shift now. Like, maybe I shouldn't do this. And then he accuses the creature. Your repentance is now superfluous. If you had listened to the voice of conscience and heeded the stings of remorse, Frankenstein would yet have lived. So he throws an accusation at the creature's lament and asking for forgiveness. And the creature's like, and do you dream? Like, that's like, are you mad? Like that Victor had said earlier to Walton. Do you think that I was then dead to agony and remorse? And I'm really taken with the creature's response here, in that he talks about how he's, every time he murdered somebody, he was also suffering for this. And it kind of turns me from the compassion that it turns me from the compassion that I felt for the creature, and that this is what Victor has been doing all along. Every time somebody is murdered, Victor talks about how, oh, this so affects me. Victor, you're not the victim here. The people who were murdered were. And the creature kind of does the same thing. He says, that think ye that the groans of Clerval were music to my ears? I understand that his heart was fashioned to be susceptible of love and sympathy, and then he had to murder, and then that really affects him.
Well, he didn't have to murder.
Right. And but he feels like he has to, and the creature takes responsibility, I think, for his murder. So the plus side, we've got a con and a pro list here. The pro list is that the creature, I think, takes responsibilities for the things that he has done. The con is that I still think at the end of the day, he winds up saying, and I suffered because of it. you know, that shouldn't be the end point.
Oh, and of course he also says, you know, I was right to kill these people. They pissed me off.
Yeah.
You know, none of them did anything bad to him, really. They just made him angry.
And
it wasn't
and-
exactly self-defense with anybody.
no, he sought out to murder them all. And then he says with Elizabeth, well, he says, first, I was the slave, not the master, of an impulse which I detested, yet could not disobey. Very much like Victor.
Same use of the word slave.
Yeah, I can't help it. And the creature at one point earlier on had called. He had said, "I'm switching the roles here," and he said Victor was the slave, and he would have to obey him. And now the creature's saying, I thought I was doing that, but I actually became the slave in doing that, because I gave in to these, to these passions. And then when he kills Elizabeth, he says, that did it. Like, then I'm done. Like, I'm not even a human being anymore now. Like, I had cast off all feeling, subdued all anguish to riot in the excess of my despair. Evil thenceforth became my good. He has become the Satan of Paradise Lost, unredeemable.
And just completely perverting the nature of things, where good becomes evil and evil becomes good.
Yeah.
Well, and he's very much the product of his limited education. He, the creature. Look what he's read. He's read books about conquest and the 12 Lives, etc. And that's what he understands as sort of the normal behavior of people. Somebody pisses you off, you kill them.
Yeah. And from Paradise Lost, you're either Adam and you're cast out, or you're unredeemable, like Satan, and
obsessed with revenge, like Satan. I mean, again, the entire story of Paradise Lost is Satan seeking revenge for his fall, which is what Victor is thinking about on his deathbed, is revenge.
Well, Walton's not buying it. At first he was touched by expressions of his misery, but then indignation was rekindled, and he just says, you throw a torch into a pile of buildings, and then you sit among the ruins and lament the fall. That Walton just says, this is hypocritical of you, and forces the creature to explain himself further. I seek not a fellow feeling in my misery. No sympathy may I ever find. And this is the most honest part for the creature here. And in the creature says, in a sense, like it's, I'm not sorry. I just recognize that I'm completely lost now. I am content to suffer alone while my suffering shall endure. When I die, I am well satisfied that abhorrence and opprobrium should load my memory. This is where he's like, this is not Victor right here. Once I falsely hoped to meet with beings who, pardoning my outward form, would love me for the excellent qualities which I was capable of bringing forth. Now vice has degraded me beneath the meanest animal. The fallen angel becomes a malignant devil, yet even that enemy of God and man had friends and associates in his desolation.
If only he'd had a mother's love.
Yeah. And I'm quite alone is how he finishes it, So, and this is the point that Victor, through all of his suffering, could never say I am quite alone. Even at the very end, he's got Walton,
Victor did explicitly say I am alone. It was just
he does
absolutely ridiculous because he wasn't.
And he's never been alone. And the creature, now really is. The only tie he wound up having was with his, creator enemy. And now he's lost even that. A final last Coleridge Ancient Mariner link there, I think, because I hear that echo of alone, all alone on a wide, wide sea. So this is the creature here. My soul in agony is how that stanza ends with in Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. But I am quite alone. That is, that could be a, that's the passage that I read to start, today's, a little more than that. And to start today's thing, because this is what where the creature has ended up. And then he tells how he's going to kill himself. Actually, no, before then, whilst I destroyed his hopes, here's his real justification for why he's lamenting at the end here. Whilst I destroyed his hopes, Victor's hopes, I did not satisfy my own desires. They were forever ardent and craving. Still, I desired love and fellowship, and I was still spurned. Was there no injustice in this? Am I to be thought the only criminal when all humankind sinned against me? That this injustice that he's, railing against here, I'm buying it. I'm completely buying the creature's final justification for what he has been put through, in a way that I don't, well, because Victor doesn't come to, I think, the same realizations of what he's done wrong. And I feel like the creature does realize it. And so it makes his, his own desolation here at the end. I sympathize with it, even though I recognize he has completely murdered innocent people out of nothing more than thoughts of revenge. So what do you guys think? Are you okay with the creature?
I mean,
Oh,
oh, go ahead, Les.
No, I was just going to say, the interesting question to me is what happens next. The creature, he mentions that I shall ascend my funeral pyre, but I don't read that as suicide. I don't really think he's planning to take his life. He just doesn't know what's happening next. And I'm very much enjoying Mike Mignola's comic books that are sort of the creature later, dealing with trying to figure out who he is and what his purpose is. And I think that's really where the book was intended to end. It was Mary's way, not Percy's ending, Mary's ending, that the creature really is, what shall I say, at sea about his choices. Yeah. And where his life is going at this point.
He says, I shall quit your vessel on the ice raft which brought me hither. I shall collect my funeral pyre and consume to ashes this miserable frame, that its remains may afford no light to any curious and unhallowed wretch who would create such another as I have been. I shall die. And I love this. I shall no longer feel the agonies. And then I shall no longer see the sun and stars. That he will sacrifice himself so he can't go on. But are you thinking, Les, that he's not going to do this?
Right. I think he's doing that so that Walton, I'm not even sure he said it. I think maybe Walton made it up as a way to explain why he didn't do what he told Victor he was going to do.
Interesting. Yeah. That leaves open the case for, the creature going on.
And opens up room for so many sequels in which the creature still exists. So thanks, Mary. But I also want to point out that the creature intends to burn Victor on a funeral pyre, which first of all is such a classical way to bury someone, although I suppose if you're in like in the Arctic, that's what you do with the body. But also Victor, his final end is to be consumed by fire, and not to, like, in some ways this is very on the nose, because Victor is the modern Prometheus, and we've talked about the various myths of Prometheus, which is he stole fire from the gods. Fire and light are usually metaphors for knowledge, particularly in Western culture. So if you read this symbolism and kind of its most basic level, Victor is going to be quite literally consumed by fire.
Well,
Consumed.
he doesn't specifically, did I read this wrong? He doesn't specifically say he will do this to Victor. He's going to do this to himself.
Oh, I was under the impression that he was going to burn Victor's
He
body.
says, I shall collect my funeral pile and consume to ashes this miserable frame. You think that he means, I think he's talking
Right,
about
I think he
himself.
means himself.
Yeah.
See, I don't know where this was, but I was under the impression that he was going to burn Victor's body first and then climb on top of the pyre himself.
I think that's Branagh's Frankenstein movie that actually
which I have not seen
Yeah.
actually. So, you know,
that actually happens in that. So yeah. Les, I buy that he's going to kill himself only because I completely believe his speech here that he is, that he is so alone that everything is destroyed now, that he cannot go on. He has given into that, and that's why I buy it. I buy that he is at that point of despair where he recognizes things will never change from now on. So
Until he sees a penguin on the ice.
Or a polar bear. Yeah, and the polar bear.
Polar bear, right.
Yeah, this happens, yeah. He gives a final farewell. Farewell, Frankenstein. If thou wert yet alive and yet cherished a desire of revenge against me, it would be better satiated in my life than in my destruction. And then the final here, I want to show a couple pages here. I know we're running over a little today, but I want to show the final finality of this in the manuscript, the 2 manuscript copies and the printed text. Because the novel ends, but soon I shall die, and what I now feel be no longer felt. Soon these burning miseries will be extinct. I shall ascend my funeral pile triumphantly and exult in the agony of the torturing flames. The light of that conflagration will fade away. My ashes will be swept into the sea by the winds. My spirit will sleep in peace, or if it thinks, it will not surely think thus. Farewell. He sprung from the cabin window as he said this upon the ice raft, which lay close to the vessel. He was soon borne away by the waves and lost in darkness and distance. Which is the 3rd time that image has happened with him in the novel, that he has been seen to be, when he departs, he is lost in the distance or in the ice flows, or, Victor sees him lost in something twice, that when he sees him fading away. And now that's how the novel ends as well. It's a great ending, I think, and so lyrical. Here's where I want to share what happens in the changes in the draft to the fair copy to the printed edition with those last couple paragraphs. And here they are. In the center is the fair copy manuscript, which is wrong. Oh man, I messed this up. All right. What you're saying, you're not saying. This is the draft manuscript right here in the center. That's what I meant to write. Over on the left is the fair copy manuscript. Now the difference is that the draft manuscript here in the center, ignore where it says fair copy here. That's not true. Can I cross that out? Good. This is what Mary Shelley has in her draft manuscript right here. And it's much shorter than what is finally printed in the edition here. Soon, he cried, clasping his hands, I shall die, and what I now feel will no longer be felt. Soon these thoughts, these burning miseries will be extinct. I shall descend my pile triumphantly, and the flame that consumes my body will give enjoyment or tranquility to my mind. He sprung from the cabin window as he said this onto upon an ice raft that lay close to the vessel, and pushing himself off, he was carried away by the waves, and I soon lost sight of him. there's a fair copy of the manuscript that exists, and we don't have, it's not complete, but we have many pages of it. And that's over here. I'm sorry, I miswrote this. This is the fair copy. And the fair copy is they write it out neatly to give to the printer, so then the printer can set it in type. And it's changed. Now, the interesting about this is that this fair copy manuscript, this part of it, this is all in Percy's hand, not Mary's. So we don't know if Percy changed what Mary wrote here himself in the fair copy, or if they both talked about it, or if there was another version that they were kind of working out this end. All we have are the two, are the two here. And in the fair copy, it's, I shall ascend my funeral pile triumphantly, exult in the agony of the torturing flames. My ashes will be swept into the sea by the winds. My spirit will sleep in peace. And then it's interesting, it's adieu here, and it's farewell in the printed edition. And then it's in this, but this is the same as the printed edition, that he was soon borne away by the waves and lost. Actually, it's in the darkness of distance. And in the printed version, it's lost in darkness and distance. All these little changes, we don't know whether they are like that and of, is that just something that, is that just the printer, the typesetter did that by accident? Is that a change that happened? Was there a proof that they then edited down into this? It's really difficult to tell. The pages look like this. Let me share the pages to this. This is the, this is from the Shelley Godwin Archive website. This is the draft page in Mary's handwriting here. I think it's all Mary too, right? Any Percy on this page? Couple words here. Percy writes blasted in, enjoyment or tranquility upon. But it's basically Mary's handwriting for what we have here. And it is this, you know, I soon lost sight of him in the darkness and distance. And then the fair copy manuscript is, let me stop that share and get to the fair copy, which is in Percy's hand. And that is here. You can probably tell it's different handwriting. And this is all Percy. So this whole entire thing, her hand's not on this. That doesn't mean he wrote it. Clearly they're collaborating this whole time. It just means that at some point he was doing the fair copy manuscript. And this is the, you know, he was soon borne away by the waves and lost in the darkness of distance. So
if you go back to the previous one, Ed, you'll see that Mary used an ampersand, which looks kind of like it could be the word of. So I'm not sure we could blame Percy for that.
I know
change.
he could be writing of, or she could be writing as I said, yeah, can you see it there? Yeah, that's an ampersand that could easily be misinterpreted as of. But then but it complicates, because then the printed version is and, which isn't on the, you know, on the fair
If you
copy.
look at Percy's sort of says of, but maybe not.
Maybe it's supposed to
That
be
looks like
and.
a strange ampersand too.
Yeah. So I am fascinated by the changes to this. And then it's because throughout most of the draft manuscript, you can see Percy's additions by his handwriting, so you understand what he's changed. But for this final couple paragraphs of the novel, there's no changes in the draft, and all the changes happen in the fair copy, and then they're in the book, even, you know, virtually the same, but just one change. So it's hard to know where, you know, what the author is of these exact words at the end. Now, usually Percy's additions to the novel are and it's only about 5,000 words of the novel. So it's not a great deal of words he's added to it, but they're clearly collaborating through the whole writing process and talking about this all the time. And I just wish we had some better direction towards those final words, which I think work exceptionally well at the end of this novel. So I think what I want to do is I want to say that I wish I want to know that Mary wrote them and Percy said okay and copied them on there. So, but we'll never know. So, Lost in Darkness and Distance. I also like the Lost as an echo of Paradise Lost, which seems to be the creature's, scriptural text that he carries with him and learns from, going on here. Les is convinced that that's not it. The creature's still alive. He's not going to kill himself. And there's something very, I think believable about that too. And it's like the creature's gone through so much, and now you're going to there have been many times where you think the creature could have despaired to this, point of killing himself and has not done it. So what would make now so different?
If anything, it's just the opposite. He's not, if he didn't kill himself earlier, it was because he wanted to see Victor die. And now he did. So now he's got his satisfaction. Life's good again.
He doesn't say that though.
He doesn't say that.
And for me too, it's that idea that it is the final straw for him, because he has now killed his creator. Like, how do you go on when you've killed your God? This all sounds like we're about to write a Beckett play. But it is that question that inadvertently gets asked at the end of this novel. How do you go on when you kill your creator? Not just again, reject,
you're
kill.
He doesn't, there's no agency here. I think it's a different question of what do we do when we know God is dead?
When because of your lack of praise, your creator has died.
We may have to now have to forge our own path.
Well, that's a good note to end on.
We're not ending, because we have an after show next week where we're going to have a wrap up with all the co-hosts dealing with all these issues that we've talked about in this novel, and we'll have a lot of fun next week. I'll have a different cocktail, and for everybody watching, you can ask the co-host any question you like during that, and we'll see what transpires. But that's what I have for today. I think it's always so weird to get to the end. It was like this with Dracula too. We're like, don't I have? Yes, I have more to talk about, but we have another episode to do it, to wrap things up. So, Franken readers, thank all you for tuning in today. We'll post this recording on our website if that's how you're watching. Thank you so much. I hope you all join us for the after show party next week. The first edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is just one of the many gems of the Rosenbach's collections. If you're looking for more virtual engagement, head on over to the Rosenbach website. Check out the other virtual offerings we have, including a talk tomorrow night with Paula Morantz-Cohen of Human Kindness about Shakespeare. You can also visit the Rosenbach because we are open. You can go online and register for time tickets for your visit. We just take one party at a time. So you basically get the whole museum to yourself to see the new exhibition on 19th century Japanese sailor Manjiro. And you can go out and look at our garden. But I also ask you to support the Rosenbach, which you can do by donation or becoming a member. And the basic membership level is called the Mary Shelley level. Anastasia, man, thanks for being here to wrap up the last chapter. It's
been a pleasure, as always.
I've had so much fun talking about this book with you, and we'll talk more next week about it too when you return. Les, man, thank you for taking more time than you probably thought you were going to take today to talk about this.
What a pleasure.
Good, thank you. I always appreciate you coming on. You joined us for our Franken cocktail party as well. I think it's well. I have a glass on the way to you. There's a Sundays with Frankenstein glass on the way to you.
I shall fill it and raise it in your honor.
Good, thank you. Yeah, and you can drink it at a more appropriate time. So than now when it's, well, we're at least in the afternoon for you now.
Right, we're at least ready for lunch now.
Awesome. Thank you both. Everyone else, join us next week for our final Sundays with Frankenstein show. And then in a couple months from then, we'll be starting Jane Eyre on Sundays with Jane Eyre. Once again, will be played out by Tucker Christine's pleated Cazelle song, It's Alive. Farewell, wandering spirits, and remember you have hope and the world before you. Bye-bye, everyone.
I have some candy for you.